Hey everybody, welcome to John Allen Outside. I'm John, and in this video I'm going to share with you 5 things that I think you should check before you go on your next backpacking trip. And it doesn't matter whether it's a 1-night trip or a 200-night trip. These are all important things for you to check into before you leave and hit the trail. Now, some of this stuff I learned the hard way by making mistakes, and that's why I'm making this video, so you can ensure that your next trip is an awesome one. So let's get started with number 1, and that is to test your water filter. I've got my trusty Sawyer squeeze here, and what happened to me earlier this year is I went on a weekend trip with my son and one of his friends, and guess what? I didn't test it. I get out there, go to the first water source, and I can't even get a drop through this thing. And that was kind of a pain because then I had to borrow my son's Katadyn the rest of the trip, and we've got the old Sawyer versus Katadyn war going on at our household, so he gave me a hard time about that one. What happened was, the last time I had washed it out, which was the previous season, I had just used regular tap water, and some of the minerals and deposits, they get in there and they clog up that filter. Very easy to fix when you're at home. You just run some vinegar through it and it's as good as new. But if you're like me, you're not taking vinegar with you out on the trail, so I was out of luck. If I was by myself, I would have had to boil my water, and that would have been a real pain. So test that water filter, just take a few minutes, run some water through it, and make sure you're ready for your next trip. The next thing is to clip those toenails. I know this sounds a little bit silly, but if you've got longer toenails and you're going downhill, they're going to jam into the front of your shoes, and that's going to hurt a lot. It can even cause your toenails to get black and fall off. So get those things clipped up. Another thing that can happen is if your toenails are a little bit too long, you can get some friction between your toes where that toenail's rubbing against the side of your toe. Not going to happen if you're just wandering around the house, the grocery store, around town, walking the dog. But if you're walking 8, 10, 15, 20 miles, that's going to start to rub and you're going to end up with blisters, and that's going to be very painful. Just take a few minutes, clip your toenails, and you simply won't regret it. The next thing to check for are trail updates or trail alerts. Most trails are going to have some kind of a website alert system where they post anything interesting or noteworthy that's going on that trail, such as trail closures or fires or bridges out or dangerous conditions on the trail. Go out to your trail and check for trail alerts. Here's an example of where that saved me one time. This was just last fall when I was going to go out to the Ice Age Trail Eastern Terminus and just do a day hike. Right before I left, I went out to the website to check for trail alerts, and I found out that they were doing a bunch of construction in the park there, and it was completely closed. So that saved me driving all the way out there and finding out that I couldn't do any hiking. So check for trail alerts, go out there, see what you can find. It may save you some time. It may help you understand that you need to reroute your original planned trip to something else, or maybe you find out that there's nothing going on at all and you can just go on as planned. But really important thing to do is always check for any type of trail updates or alerts before you go out on your trip. The next thing to check is to make sure all your stuff is charged, whether that be your battery pack or your Garmin InReach or your headlamp if you have one that charges with a USB. I've gone out on the trail before, and here's something that happened to me. I went out there, I had charged up my battery pack like a week or two before my trip, so I just grabbed it off the shelf and went out there. Unbeknownst to me, somebody had used it and drained it almost all the way out. I had like 1 dot left. Well, had I just taken 2 seconds and plugged it in, I would have realized that, and I could have taken care of it ahead of time. So just take a couple of seconds, make sure all your stuff is charged up, because one of the most precious resources out on the trail is power, and you don't want to be left short. The last thing to check, and this is going to be right before you start the car to drive away on your trip, one last review of your gear checklist. Now, I know you probably went through your checklist 2 or 3 times to make sure you had everything, but I'm suggesting to do this right when you're about to drive away, and here is why. It's very easy to get everything together, and then you carry it out to the car, and then you realize later when you get to the trail that you left something behind. A quick example of this is a couple of years ago, we went on a longer trip out to South Dakota, and one of my friends had left his trekking poles leaning against the wall at home. Now, if he would have just looked at that list one last time when he was in the car, he would have realized, oh man, I left those trekking poles in the house. I better go grab those. Another example, and this is just from last year when Callan and I went out to the long trail. Callan didn't go through his checklist before we left, and he left his sleeping pad at home. That meant it was 3 or 4 nights before we got to the next town. He had to sleep on the ground for a couple of nights, and that was really kind of a rotten thing to do. It was very hard. He did not get a good night's sleep any of those nights. So my suggestion is to just go through that checklist one last time when you're in the car ready to go, just to make sure you didn't leave something sitting on the counter or something just on that fell off the bed or whatever. Just make sure you have everything with you and you're going to be all set. The next time you're going on a backpacking trip, make sure you test your water filter, clip those toenails, check the trail conditions, get your stuff charged, and go through that checklist one last time before you pull out of the driveway. If you do that stuff, you're going to increase the odds that you're going to have a fantastic trip. As always, if you found any value in this video, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks, and we'll see you out on the trail.